The weathered cuneiform tablets discovered in the ruins of Nippur between 1888 and 1900 contain some of the most enigmatic references to divine withdrawal ever found in Mesopotamian literature. Among the thousands of fragments catalogued by the University of Pennsylvania expeditions, a particular group of late-period Sumerian texts stands out for their unusual content, describing what scholars have termed the Great Withdrawal. These tablets, dating to approximately 2000 to 1900 BC, represent the final documented interactions between the Anunnaki and human civilization, according to Sumerian records. The most significant of these tablets, designated as CBS 10673 in the University Museum's collection, contains a detailed account written in archaic Sumerian script that differs markedly from contemporary administrative documents. The text begins with a standard invocation to Enlil, but quickly shifts to describe a gathering of the Anunnaki Council where a momentous decision was reached. What makes this document particularly intriguing is its matter-of-fact tone. Lacking the typical religious flourishes found in most Sumerian religious texts, the evidence we're about to examine spans the final centuries of direct Anunnaki presence, drawing from temple archives across Mesopotamia, astronomical records that documented departure routes through the cosmos, and the elaborate preparations made for maintaining contact across vast distances of space and time. Archaeological evidence from Nippur itself supports the narrative found in these tablets. Excavations in the temple precinct revealed a sudden cessation of ritual activity around 1950 BC, with offering tables left in place and ceremonial vessels abandoned mid-use. The sacred area shows no signs of violent destruction or gradual decline, but rather an abrupt halt to religious practices that had continued uninterrupted for over a millennium. Similar patterns emerge at other major Sumerian religious centers, suggesting a coordinated withdrawal from temple activities across the region. The University of Pennsylvania expeditions, led by John Peters and Hermann Hilprecht, uncovered these departure tablets in the deepest strata of the Ekkur temple complex, precisely where the most sacred and administratively critical documents would have been stored. The tablets were found in sealed clay jars within a chamber that showed evidence of deliberate preservation rather than hasty abandonment. The chamber walls had been treated with bitumen to create waterproof seals, and the jars themselves were marked with administrative seals that indicated their contents were meant for long-term storage and future reference. Carbon dating of organic materials found in association with these tablets confirms their late Sumerian origin, while the script style and linguistic features place their composition during the final decades of the Ur-3 dynasty. What distinguishes these departure tablets from typical administrative or religious documents is their unprecedented directness in describing divine decision-making processes. Where most Sumerian religious texts employ elaborate metaphors and poetic language, these tablets read more like meeting minutes or administrative reports. They describe specific debates, votes, and procedural decisions made by the Anunnaki Council, with a level of detail that suggests the scribes were recording actual events, rather than composing mythological narratives. The tablets reference specific astronomical observations that were used to determine departure timing, economic calculations regarding resource allocation, and procedural guidelines for the human administrators who would maintain temple operations after divine withdrawal. The precision of these administrative details and their integration with astronomical data demonstrates that the departure was planned according to specific criteria rather than occurring as a spontaneous decision or mythological event. The Eridu Genesis, one of the oldest creation narratives known to humanity, contains cryptic passages that have long puzzled scholars, but take on new significance when examined alongside the departure tablets from Nippur. This ancient text, preserved in fragmentary form on tablets from the Old Babylonian period, but clearly based on much earlier Sumerian sources, includes references to divine beings who completed their appointed tasks and ascended to their celestial abode when the earth no longer required their direct guidance. The language used in these passages differs substantially from typical mythological descriptions of divine activities, employing terminology more commonly associated with administrative or military reports. Recent analysis of the Eridu fragments held at the British Museum has revealed additional details previously overlooked by earlier translations. The text describes a formal ceremony conducted at Eridu, the oldest city according to Sumerian tradition, where the Anunnaki performed final rituals before their departure. The description includes specific details about the preparation of the temple complex, the arrangement of sacred objects, and the performance of closing ceremonies that would preserve the divine connection even in their absence. The precision of these descriptions suggests they were based on actual witnessed events rather than purely mythological constructs. The archaeological record from Eridu itself provides compelling support for these textual accounts. Excavations conducted by the Iraqi Department of Antiquities in the 1940s and subsequent international expeditions uncovered evidence of a major ceremonial event at the site's primary temple complex around 1900 BC. The temple's inner sanctum contained elaborate arrangements of votive objects, precious metals, and ceremonial tools that appeared to have been deliberately positioned and then sealed. Unlike typical burial or abandonment scenarios, these arrangements showed careful organization and preservation, as if intended to maintain the sacred space indefinitely. The positioning of these objects follows geometric patterns that correspond to astronomical alignments significant in Mesopotamian cosmology, suggesting the arrangement served both symbolic and functional purposes related to maintaining connection with departed divine beings. Chemical analysis of residues found on ceremonial vessels reveals the use of rare incenses and oils that were typically reserved for the most sacred rituals, confirming that the final ceremonies involved extraordinary preparations rather than routine religious observances. The scale of these preparations and the resources invested in them indicate that Sumerian religious authorities considered the departure ceremonies to be events of paramount importance that required meticulous documentation and commemoration. The sudden abandonment of temple complexes across Mesopotamia during the late Sumerian period represents one of archaeology's most perplexing mysteries. At the great ziggurat complex shows evidence of abrupt cessation of maintenance and ritual activity around the same period. The temple's inner chambers contained partially completed renovation work, with tools and materials left exactly where workers had placed them. Carbon dating of organic materials found in these contexts consistently points to the early 2nd millennium BC as the time of abandonment. At Uruk, the situation presents even more dramatic evidence. The Anu temple complex, dedicated to the sky god and traditionally associated with Anunnaki worship, underwent extensive modifications in its final phase of use. Archaeological evidence suggests these modifications were not repairs or improvements, but rather systematic preparations for long-term closure. Drainage systems were sealed, valuable objects were carefully stored in protected chambers, and access points were permanently blocked using techniques that would preserve the interior spaces indefinitely. The German Archaeological Institute's excavations at Uruk between 1928 and 1939 documented these closure preparations in remarkable detail. The sealing techniques employed included multiple layers of clay, bitumen, and stone that created hermetic environments protecting interior chambers from moisture infiltration and structural damage. The precision of these sealing operations and the quality of materials used indicate that substantial resources were devoted to ensuring the preservation of temple interiors for extended periods. Inside the sealed chambers, excavators discovered intact ceremonial equipment, astronomical instruments, and tablets containing what appear to be operational manuals for temple maintenance. The temple complex at Lagash revealed similar patterns of deliberate preservation rather than abandonment. Excavations in the 1980s uncovered chambers that had been sealed with a precision that suggests advanced knowledge of preservation techniques. The sealing materials included bitumen, cedar resin, and other substances known for their protective properties, applied in layers that would maintain stable internal conditions for millennia. Inside these sealed chambers, archaeologists found intact ceremonial equipment, astronomical instruments, and tablets containing detailed instructions for future reopening and reactivation of temple facilities. The consistency of these preservation techniques across multiple sites, separated by substantial distances, indicates coordinated planning and shared knowledge of long-term preservation methods. The astronomical instruments found in these sealed chambers demonstrate capabilities that exceeded typical ancient Mesopotamian technology, including bronze fixtures with precision graduations for measuring celestial positions and crystalline lenses that suggest optical enhancement of astronomical observations. The survival of these instruments in functional condition after thousands of years testifies to the effectiveness of the preservation techniques employed and the care taken to protect equipment that would be needed for future re-establishment of divine human contact. Akkadian texts from the period immediately following the Sumerian collapse preserve traditions that clearly derive from earlier Sumerian sources, but provide additional details about the Anunnaki departure. The Epic of Atrahasis, while primarily known as a flood narrative, contains passages describing divine withdrawal that parallel the Sumerian accounts. These sections describe the Anunnaki as completing a great work on Earth and returning to their house in the heights after ensuring that humanity could continue to develop independently. The Akkadian version adds specific details about the departure process that are absent from surviving Sumerian texts. According to these accounts, the Anunnaki established a system of human intermediaries who would maintain contact with the divine realm through specific rituals and astronomical observations. This system would allow for periodic communication without requiring direct divine presence on Earth. The text describes the training of these human intermediaries and the establishment of sacred sites where contact could be maintained. The precision with which these procedures are described suggests they were based on actual, operational protocols rather than religious mythology. Babylonian sources from the 1st millennium BC preserve even more detailed accounts of the Anunnaki departure, though these later texts show clear evidence of legendary embellishment. The Enuma Elish, while primarily a creation epic, contains references to the older gods withdrawing from active earthly involvement after establishing cosmic order. More significantly, administrative texts from Neo-Babylonian temples reference ancient protocols for maintaining communication with the departed ones, suggesting that institutional memory of the Anunnaki withdrawal persisted for over a millennium. The consistency of these accounts across different periods and cultures strongly suggests they preserve genuine historical traditions rather than purely mythological constructs. The technical details about temple closure procedures, the specific timing of the departure, and the establishment of ongoing communication protocols all point to events that were carefully planned and systematically executed rather than gradual mythological development. Physical evidence from excavated sites supports the textual accounts in remarkable detail. At multiple locations, archaeologists have discovered what appear to be communication devices or astronomical instruments left behind by the departing Anunnaki. These objects, typically found in sealed temple chambers, display construction techniques and materials that differ significantly from known Mesopotamian craftsmanship. The devices often incorporate crystalline components, precise geometric arrangements, and metallurgical techniques that exceed the documented capabilities of ancient Mesopotamian civilizations. Analysis of these artifacts reveals manufacturing methods that required understanding of optical principles, electromagnetic properties, and precision engineering that would not be formally recognized until modern scientific developments. The survival of these sophisticated devices in sealed temple contexts provides tangible evidence that the departure involved transfer of advanced technology to human guardians who would maintain communication capabilities during the period of divine absence. The astronomical observations recorded in the final months of Anunnaki presence on Earth provide crucial context for understanding the internal deliberations that preceded their departure Temple archives from Babylon, dating to the Neo-Babylonian period but clearly based on much older sources, preserve detailed accounts of the final council sessions held at Nippur's Akure temple complex. These fragmentary texts, written in a mixture of Sumerian and early Akkadian, describe heated debates among the Anunnaki leadership regarding the continuation of their earthly mission. The most complete account appears on tablet VAT 9555 housed in the Vorderasiatische Museum in Berlin. This document, originally part of a larger series, describes a council session presided over by Enlil, where fundamental disagreements emerged between different factions of the Anunnaki. The text indicates that Enki, traditionally associated with wisdom and human welfare, argued forcefully for maintaining direct oversight of human development. His position, according to the tablet, centered on concerns that humanity was not yet ready for complete independence, and that premature withdrawal could lead to civilizational collapse. Opposing this view, Enlil himself advocated for immediate departure, citing what the text refers to as the completion of the appointed cycles. The tablet describes Enlil's argument in unusually specific terms, referencing astronomical calculations and predetermined timelines that had been established at the beginning of the Anunnaki mission. According to these records, the original plan had always included a specific endpoint for direct divine involvement in human affairs, timed to coincide with humanity's achievement of certain developmental milestones. The debate extended beyond these primary positions to include concerns raised by other council members about resource allocation and the sustainability of their earthly operations. Tablet fragments from the University of Pennsylvania collection describe Ninhursag's presentation of detailed accounting records showing the enormous expenditure of energy and materials required to maintain their earthly presence. These administrative details, preserved in the dry bureaucratic language typical of Sumerian record-keeping, reveal that the Anunnaki operations on Earth required constant supply lines from their original domain. The mathematical calculations preserved in these accounting tablets demonstrate sophisticated understanding of logistics, resource management, and long-term planning that extended across multiple centuries. The precision of these calculations and their integration with astronomical timing data indicates that the departure decision was based on comprehensive analysis of multiple factors, rather than arbitrary timing or mythological symbolism. Economic factors played a crucial role in the departure decision, according to multiple tablet sources. The Driem archive, discovered during excavations at Pusrichdagen, contains livestock records that document massive increases in cattle, sheep, and goat deliveries to temple complexes during the period immediately preceding the departure. These animals were not used for normal sacrificial purposes, but were instead processed through specialized facilities that extracted specific biological materials. The tablets describe complex procedures for refining these materials, including treatments with rare minerals and exposure to specific astronomical alignments. The most revealing economic evidence comes from silver tablet CBS 16042, which records transactions involving what the text calls sky metal. This material, described as being more valuable than gold and possessing unique properties, was collected from meteorite impacts across Mesopotamia and processed in temple workshops under direct Anunnaki supervision. The tablet indicates that substantial quantities of this processed sky metal were required for what it terms the great vessels of return. The language suggests these vessels were being prepared or maintained for the eventual departure. Administrative records from the Driem archive show that the collection and processing of sky metal intensified dramatically during the final 50 years of documented Anunnaki presence, with quantities increasing by nearly 300% compared to earlier periods. The economic burden of these operations extended far beyond the temple complexes themselves to affect the entire Sumerian economic system. Tax records from Umma and Lagash document extraordinary levies imposed on agricultural communities to support what temple administrators described as the great work of the Sky Lords. These levies included not only standard grain and livestock tributes, but also quotas for specific minerals, rare timbers, and exotic substances that had no apparent use in normal Mesopotamian economic activities. The precision with which these materials were specified in the administrative texts suggests they were required for specific technological processes rather than general religious purposes. Chemical analysis of residues found in temple workshop areas reveals processing activities that involved high-temperature metallurgy, chemical refinement of biological materials, and preparation of crystalline substances using techniques that exceeded documented Mesopotamian capabilities. The scale of these operations required coordination across multiple temple centers and consumed resources that would have supported thousands of workers in normal economic activities. The burden on the Sumerian economy became increasingly unsustainable as the departure date approached, contributing to the economic stress that characterized the final decades of the Ur III dynasty. Temple maintenance records describe escalating costs for specialized equipment and rare materials that were essential for Anunnaki operations, but provided no economic benefit to human communities. The administrative texts reveal growing tension between divine resource requirements and human economic sustainability, suggesting that economic factors may have influenced the timing of the departure as much as the completion of predetermined cycles or human developmental milestones. The Tablets of Destinies references scattered throughout Sumerian literature take on new significance when examined in the context of the departure decision, unlike the mythological interpretations typically applied to these texts. Careful analysis reveals they contain specific chronological information tied to astronomical cycles. Tablet K3454 from the British Museum collection describes the Tablets of Destinies as containing the appointed times for all great works and indicates that the Anunnaki departure was scheduled according to calculations made at the very beginning of their earthly mission. The astronomical component of these predetermined timelines becomes evident in temple records from Uruk that document detailed observations of planetary movements and stellar positions. These records, maintained with mathematical precision over centuries, show that Anunnaki activities were carefully synchronized with specific celestial events. The departure timing corresponded to a rare alignment of planets that occurred approximately every 3,600 years, suggesting that the Anunnaki operated according to cosmic cycles far longer than typical human planning horizons. References to the predetermined timeline appear in multiple sources, with consistent details that argue against later mythological invention. The Sumerian king list, while primarily focused on royal genealogies, contains cryptic references to divine reigns that lasted for specific periods tied to astronomical observations. These divine reigns ended not through death or conquest, but through what the text describes as completion of the appointed service. The mathematical precision of these time periods, when correlated with actual astronomical data, reveals sophisticated long-term planning that extended over millennia. The concept of predetermined destinies appears throughout Mesopotamian literature as a fundamental principle of cosmic order rather than arbitrary divine whim. Administrative texts from Nippur describe regular consultations of the Tablets of Destinies to determine optimal timing for major undertakings, including temple construction, military campaigns, and economic planning. These consultations involved complex astronomical calculations that determined when celestial conditions would be most favourable for specific activities. The systematic nature of these calculations and their consistent correlation with successful outcomes suggests they were based on genuine understanding of astronomical influences rather than superstitious practices. The departure timing calculations preserved in the Council Debate tablets reference multiple overlapping cycles that had to align simultaneously to create optimal conditions for the journey. These cycles included planetary orbital periods, solar activity cycles, and what the texts describe as the Great Wheel of the Stars, which modern astronomy would recognize as the precession of the equinoxes. The mathematical sophistication required to calculate the convergence of these multiple cycles demonstrates astronomical knowledge that far exceeded the capabilities typically attributed to ancient Mesopotamian astronomers. The precision of these calculations and their successful prediction of optimal departure conditions validates the Anunnaki claim that their mission timeline had been predetermined from the beginning. According to cosmic principles rather than arbitrary decisions, the resource management issues become clearer when examined alongside contemporary Sumerian administrative texts from major temple complexes. Records from Girsu show dramatic increases in tribute requirements and labour obligations during the final decades of Anunnaki presence. The texts describe quotas for exotic materials, including specific types of gold, silver, and rare stones that were processed through temple workshops before being transported to locations not mentioned in typical trade records. The quantities involved far exceeded the needs of normal temple operations, suggesting these materials were being prepared for transport elsewhere. The most detailed resource management records come from the archives of Shulgi, the second king of the Ur-III dynasty, who ruled from approximately 2094 to 2047 BC. These texts document a massive expansion of resource extraction and processing activities across the Sumerian territories under direct temple supervision. The records describe the establishment of specialized workshops for metallurgy, crystal processing, and biological material refinement that operated according to technical specifications provided by Anunnaki supervisors. The workshop locations were strategically distributed across Mesopotamia to optimize access to specific raw materials while maintaining security for sensitive operations. Administrative tablets from these workshops preserve technical instructions that demonstrate advanced understanding of chemistry, metallurgy, and materials science. The texts describe precise temperature controls for smelting operations, specific chemical treatments for refining precious metals, and elaborate procedures for growing and processing crystals with particular optical properties. The technical sophistication of these instructions exceeds the documented capabilities of Sumerian craftsmen, confirming that the workshops operated under direct divine technical supervision. The labour requirements for these operations strained the Sumerian workforce to breaking point during the final decades before departure. Census records from Lagash document the conscription of thousands of workers for temple projects that provided no apparent benefit to local communities. The workers were organised into specialised teams trained in specific technical procedures, suggesting that the operations required skilled labour rather than simple manual work. The scale of these labour mobilisations and their impact on agricultural productivity contributed to the economic stress that characterised the terminal phase of direct Anunnaki rule. Transportation logistics for moving processed materials to central collection points required sophisticated coordination across the entire Sumerian transportation network. Administrative texts describe the movement of massive quantities of materials along canal systems and overland routes to Nippur, where they were transferred to facilities that are described in the texts but have not been archaeologically identified. The volume of materials being transported and the security measures employed to protect these shipments indicate that they were considered extremely valuable and essential for the departure preparations. The economic impact of these resource mobilizations extended beyond immediate material costs to include opportunity costs from diverting productive capacity away from normal economic activities. Agricultural production declined as farmers were conscripted for temple projects. Craft production suffered as workshops focused on specialized divine requirements rather than consumer goods. And trade networks were disrupted as transportation resources were commandeered for material movement to temple centers. The cumulative effect of these economic disruptions contributed to the civilizational stress that emerged during the final decades of Anunnaki presence, and may have influenced the decision to accelerate the departure timeline. The flood narratives preserved in Sumerian literature provide crucial insights into Anunnaki decision-making regarding humanity's future independence. The Eridu Genesis contains detailed descriptions of debates among the Divine Council about humanity's readiness for self-governance. Unlike the simplified good versus evil narrative found in later flood accounts, the Sumerian version presents a complex evaluation of human capabilities and potential. The text describes Enki's detailed arguments about human achievements in agriculture, metallurgy, and social organization, countered by other council members' concerns about human violence and environmental destruction. The flood narrative in tablet CBS 10673 reveals that the Great Deluge was not intended as punishment, but as a test of human resilience and adaptability. The text describes the flood as a carefully calibrated challenge designed to determine whether humanity could survive and rebuild without direct divine assistance. The preservation of selected humans and animals was not an act of mercy, but a controlled experiment in human independence. The successful rebuilding of civilization after the flood provided the evidence needed to support the departure decision. Archaeological evidence from flood layers in Mesopotamian sites supports this interpretation of the deluge as a managed event rather than a natural disaster. Excavations at Ur and other major sites reveal flood deposits that show unusual characteristics, suggesting controlled water release rather than typical riverine flooding. The flood layers contain debris patterns that indicate systematic evacuation of valuable materials before the flooding began, and post-flood reconstruction shows immediate access to resources and knowledge that would have been impossible if the event had been genuinely catastrophic. The Sumerian flood accounts also describe post-deluge communications between the Anunnaki and human survivors that establish protocols for future interaction. These protocols, detailed in tablet fragments from Nippur, specified that ongoing contact would be maintained through selected human intermediaries who received special training and communication procedures. The text described the establishment of specific sacred sites where these communications could take place, and the creation of ritual calendars that would ensure proper timing for contact attempts. The precision with which these protocols are described suggests they were actual operational procedures rather than mythological embellishments. The flood served as a demonstration that human civilization possessed sufficient resilience to survive major catastrophes and rebuild complex societies without continuous divine oversight. This successful demonstration addressed the primary concern raised by Enki and his faction about humanity's readiness for independence. The rapidity with which Sumerian cities were rebuilt after the flood, the restoration of agricultural systems, and the re-establishment of trade networks all provided evidence that humanity had developed the organizational capabilities and technical knowledge necessary to maintain civilization independently. The post-flood period also revealed improvements in human governance systems and social organization that emerged as survivors adapted to reconstruction challenges. Administrative texts from the early dynastic period following the flood show more sophisticated resource management, improved coordination between cities, and development of legal codes that reduced internal conflicts. These advances demonstrated that humanity was capable of learning from crisis and developing more effective social systems without divine intervention. Internal conflicts among the Anunnaki leadership extended beyond the immediate question of departure timing to fundamental disagreements about the nature of their relationship with humanity. Tablet Vi A T17019 describes a faction led by Marduk that advocated for a gradual withdrawal process that would allow for continued intervention if human civilization faced existential threats. This position conflicted with Enlil's insistence on complete separation, based on his argument that continued intervention would prevent humanity from developing true independence. The debate involved detailed assessments of human technological and social development that reveal the Anunnaki's sophisticated understanding of civilizational dynamics. Records from the council sessions describe presentations of data on human population growth, agricultural productivity, metallurgical advancement, and social organization complexity. These assessments were compared against predetermined benchmarks that had been established as criteria for human readiness for independence. The texts indicate that humanity had exceeded expectations in some areas while falling short in others, creating genuine uncertainty about the optimal timing for withdrawal. Enki's faction presented evidence of human innovations that had developed independently of direct divine instruction, arguing that these demonstrated sufficient creative capacity for continued progress. The examples cited include advances in irrigation technology, the development of written law codes, and innovations in astronomical observation. The text describes specific human achievements in mathematics, including the development of the sexagesimal number system and geometric principles that were discovered through independent human inquiry rather than divine teaching. These accomplishments suggested that humanity had reached a level of intellectual development that would enable continued technological advancement without ongoing divine guidance. Conversely, Enlil's supporters emphasized human tendencies toward warfare, environmental degradation, and social inequality as evidence that continued oversight would be counterproductive to long-term development. The text described detailed analyses of human conflict patterns, resource exploitation rates, and social stratification trends that revealed persistent problems despite millennia of divine guidance. Enlil's faction argued that these problems stem from fundamental aspects of human nature that could only be resolved through independent human experience and evolution, rather than external control. The faction led by Marduk proposed a compromise solution that involved maintaining minimal contact through guardian figures who would observe human development and intervene only in cases of existential threats. This proposal included detailed protocols for determining when intervention would be justified and procedures for maintaining communication channels that could facilitate emergency assistance. The debate over this compromise consumed multiple council sessions and involved extensive discussion of specific scenarios that might justify intervention. The ultimate rejection of Marduk's compromise in favour of complete withdrawal reflected Enlil's argument that any maintained presence would inevitably lead to continued dependence and prevent humanity from achieving genuine autonomy. The Council decisions document the establishment of alternative mechanisms for supporting human development that did not require direct divine presence, including the preservation of knowledge in sealed archives, the training of human intermediaries, and the establishment of communication protocols that could be maintained by human temple personnel. The decision-making process culminated in what tablet CBS 11987 describes as the final weighing, a comprehensive evaluation of all factors affecting the departure decision. This evaluation included economic assessments, timeline considerations, human development metrics, and internal Anunnaki political factors. The text indicates that the decision was ultimately unanimous, though achieved only after extensive negotiation and compromise among the various factions. The final weighing process involved systematic review of accumulated data, spanning several centuries of Anunnaki human interaction. Administrative records from Nippur describe the assembly of comprehensive reports from temple centers across Mesopotamia that documented every aspect of human development and Anunnaki operations. These reports included detailed statistics on human population growth, agricultural productivity trends, technological advancement rates, and social organization complexity. The data was analyzed using mathematical methods that modern scholars would recognize as early forms of statistical analysis, including trend projections and comparative assessments against predetermined benchmarks. The economic evaluation component of the final weighing demonstrated that continued Anunnaki presence had become economically unsustainable, given the resource requirements and the declining availability of essential materials. Temple accountants presented calculations showing that maintaining operations at current levels would require exponentially increasing resource extraction that would devastate the Mesopotamian environment and cripple human economic development. The The text describes specific projections of resource depletion timelines and environmental impact assessments that reveal sophisticated understanding of ecological limits and economic sustainability. These projections indicated that continued operations beyond the calculated departure window would create conditions that could permanently damage Earth's capacity to support advanced civilization. The timeline considerations centered on astronomical calculations that identified the upcoming planetary alignment as providing optimal conditions for the departure journey. The text described this alignment as occurring only once every 3,600 years and creating gravitational conditions that would facilitate interplanetary travel while minimizing energy requirements. Missing this alignment window would require waiting another full cycle before comparable conditions would recur. The astronomical precision required for these calculations demonstrates knowledge of orbital mechanics and celestial dynamics that exceeded documented Mesopotamian capabilities by substantial margins. The human development metrics presented during the final weighing showed mixed results that required careful interpretation. Humanity had achieved remarkable advances in agriculture, metallurgy, mathematics, and social organization that exceeded initial expectations. However, persistent patterns of warfare, environmental exploitation, and social inequality revealed limitations that continued divine presence seemed unable to resolve. The evaluation concluded that further divine intervention would likely perpetuate human dependence, rather than encouraging the independent problem-solving that would be necessary for long-term civilizational sustainability. The internal political factors involved in the decision reflected complex dynamics within Anunnaki society that extended far beyond their earthly mission. The texts hinted obligations and commitments in their home domain that required the return of personnel and resources that had been committed to Earth operations. References to the Council of Elders and the Assembly of Lights suggest hierarchical structures and decision-making processes that constrain the autonomy of the Anunnaki stationed on Earth. The departure decision appears to have been influenced by directives from these higher authorities as much as by conditions on Earth itself. The final weighing document describes the establishment of detailed transition protocols that would govern the withdrawal process and ensure continuity of essential functions after departure. These protocols specified timelines for transferring responsibilities to human administrators, procedures for preserving critical knowledge and equipment, and guidelines for maintaining minimal contact through designated guardians. The systematic nature of these transition plans demonstrates that the departure was executed as an organized withdrawal rather than an abandonment, with careful attention to ensuring that human civilization would possess the resources and knowledge necessary for continued development. Hidden within the administrative appendices of this crucial document lies evidence of a secondary resolution that has received far less scholarly attention: the designation of specific Anunnaki individuals to remain on Earth in diminished capacities as guardians and observers. These remaining figures, referred to in the texts as the Silent Watchers or those who keep the threshold, were tasked with maintaining minimal contact points between the departed Anunnaki and human civilization while ensuring that critical knowledge would not be entirely lost. The decision to leave behind guardian figures represented a compromise between complete withdrawal and continued direct presence, allowing for emergency intervention while minimizing interference with human independent development. The guardian assignment protocols described in the administrative text specify strict limitations on the activities and visibility of these remaining figures. They were prohibited from direct governance, public displays of divine authority, or interventions in normal human affairs. Their role was limited to preservation of essential knowledge, observation of human development trends, and maintenance of communication systems that could facilitate contact with the departed Anunnaki if critical circumstances warranted intervention. The text emphasized that guardians must operate in concealment, working through human intermediaries rather than revealing themselves openly. This concealment requirement necessitated the establishment of cover identities and operational procedures that would allow guardians to function effectively while remaining undetected by general human populations. The selection criteria for guardian assignments reflected both the specific knowledge domains that required preservation and the personal characteristics necessary for long-term isolation from Anunnaki society. The texts describe extensive psychological evaluations of candidates to assess their capacity for sustained solitary operation, their resistance to the temptation to exceed authorized intervention levels, and their commitment to the larger mission objectives despite separation from their peers. The psychological demands of guardian assignments were considered so severe that volunteers were required to undergo extended preparation periods that included training in human cultural practices, meditation techniques for managing isolation, and decision-making frameworks for determining appropriate responses to ambiguous situations. The establishment of guardian positions also required development of support systems that would enable these individuals to maintain their capabilities across extended time periods. The texts describe the allocation of specialized equipment, knowledge repositories, and resource caches that would provide guardians with the tools necessary to fulfill their responsibilities. These support systems were designed for autonomous operation across centuries without requiring resupply or maintenance from departed Anunnaki forces. The technological sophistication required for such long-term autonomous systems suggests capabilities that far exceeded contemporary Mesopotamian achievements. The total number of guardians assigned to remain on Earth appears to have been 7 primary figures with additional support personnel, whose exact numbers are not specified in surviving texts. This number appears repeatedly in Guardian-related documents and corresponds to the traditional significance of 7 in Mesopotamian cosmology. Each primary guardian was assigned responsibility for specific knowledge domains and geographical regions, creating a distributed network that could monitor human development across the entire ancient Near East, while maintaining redundancy in case individual guardians were compromised or unable to fulfill their duties. The assignment of specific guardians to particular knowledge domains reflected a Anunnaki understanding that human civilization required continued access to certain critical information to maintain technological and social progress. Medical knowledge, agricultural techniques, astronomical observations, and metallurgical processes were identified as areas where loss of advanced understanding could result in civilizational regression that would take centuries to recover. The Guardian system was designed to prevent such knowledge loss by maintaining repositories and providing indirect guidance that would preserve essential capabilities without creating dependence on divine instruction. Tablet BM 78942 from the British Museum's collection provides the most detailed roster of these remaining guardians. Ningish Zida, traditionally associated with serpent symbolism and underworld knowledge, was designated as the primary keeper of medical and healing wisdom. The tablet specifies that he would maintain a presence at the Gishbanda temple complex near Lagash, where he would provide guidance to human healers through dream communications and symbolic visions during specific lunar phases. The text describes elaborate protocols for these communications that involved preparation rituals for human recipients, symbolic interpretation frameworks, and verification procedures to ensure authentic divine guidance was distinguished from ordinary dreams or delusions. Ningish Zida's medical responsibilities extended beyond simple healing practices to include preservation of anatomical knowledge, surgical techniques, and pharmaceutical preparations that represented the most advanced medical capabilities developed during the Anunnaki presence. The texts describe his establishment of a hidden medical archive within the temple complex that contained detailed anatomical diagrams, surgical procedure manuals, and comprehensive pharmaceutical formulas. This archive was accessible only to initiated priests who had demonstrated both technical competency and ethical commitment to using the knowledge for human benefit rather than personal power. The selection and training of these human medical intermediaries involved rigorous programs that could extend for decades. Archaeological evidence from the Lagash region supports the textual accounts of Ningishzidah's continued presence and medical activities. Excavations at sites associated with healing temples have uncovered medical instruments, pharmaceutical preparation equipment, and anatomical models that demonstrate remarkable sophistication. Chemical analysis of residues from pharmaceutical vessels reveals compound preparations that combined multiple active ingredients in precise ratios optimized for specific therapeutic effects. The sophistication of these preparations exceeds what would be expected from trial and error experimentation alone, suggesting guidance from sources with systematic understanding of biochemistry and pharmacology. Ninhursag, despite her prominent role in earlier Anunnaki councils, accepted assignment as guardian of agricultural knowledge and fertility rites. The administrative records indicate she would establish a reduced presence at multiple sites across the Fertile Crescent, moving seasonally between temples at Kish, Adab, and Shuruppak. Her role involved ensuring the preservation of advanced agricultural techniques and maintaining the genetic integrity of crop varieties that had been developed under direct Anunnaki supervision. The tablet describes specific protocols for her interactions with human agricultural specialists, including the use of coded plant arrangements and seasonal ceremonies that would convey technical information without revealing her continued presence. The agricultural knowledge under Ninhursag's guardianship included sophisticated understanding of soil chemistry, crop rotation systems, irrigation optimization, and plant breeding techniques that had produced the high-yielding varieties that supported Mesopotamian urban civilization. The texts describe her maintenance of seed repositories that preserve genetic diversity and her provision of guidance regarding appropriate cultivation practices for different soil types and climatic conditions. Her interventions were designed to prevent the loss of productive capacity that could result from agricultural mismanagement or genetic degradation of cultivated varieties. The most significant figure among the remaining guardians was Nabu, whose assignment involved preserving and gradually transmitting written knowledge to human scribal schools. Tablet VAT2-1847 describes Nabu's establishment of a concealed presence within the temple complex at Borsippa, where he would work through selected human scribes to ensure the preservation of critical texts and the development of more sophisticated writing systems. The document details elaborate procedures for his communications with human scholars, involving specific combinations of cuneiform signs that would appear as scribble innovations, but actually contained encoded instructions for preserving and copying essential knowledge. The assignment of Nabu to knowledge preservation responsibilities reflected the critical importance of writing systems for maintaining civilization across generational transitions. The texts emphasize that without reliable methods for recording and transmitting information, humanity would be vulnerable to catastrophic knowledge loss during periods of social disruption or natural disasters. Nabu's role included not only preserving existing knowledge, but also guiding the evolution of writing systems toward greater efficiency and precision that would enhance humanity's capacity for knowledge accumulation and transmission. Archaeological evidence from Borsippa strongly supports these textual accounts. Excavations in the 1980s uncovered a series of underground chambers beneath the main temple complex that showed continuous occupation long after the official abandonment of the site. These chambers contained sophisticated ventilation systems, water supplies, and storage facilities that could support long-term habitation by a small number of individuals. Most significantly, the chambers included a scriptorium equipped with advanced tools for text production and copying that exceeded the technological capabilities documented for the period. The underground complex at Borsippa revealed additional evidence of ongoing scholarly activity in the form of tablets that show clear progression in writing techniques and content sophistication over several centuries. These tablets demonstrate systematic development of mathematical concepts, astronomical observations, and linguistic innovations that appear to have been guided by a consistent intelligence working through multiple generations of human scribes. Handwriting analysis reveals that while different human scribes produced the tablets, they all followed identical formatting protocols and used specialized terminology that appears nowhere else in contemporary Mesopotamian literature. The ventilation systems discovered in the Borsippa chambers demonstrate engineering sophistication that exceeded normal Mesopotamian architectural capabilities. The air circulation design utilized natural convection principles combined with carefully positioned shafts that maintained fresh airflow without creating drafts or allowing moisture. Infiltration. The system remained functional when discovered despite having operated without maintenance for over 3 millennia, testifying to the quality of the original engineering and the durability of construction materials. Chemical analysis of the stone used in shaft construction revealed mineral compositions that were not native to the Borsippa region, indicating that materials were specifically selected and transported for their optimal properties. The water supply system incorporated equally sophisticated engineering, including underground collection of groundwater through precisely angled channels, filtration systems using layered sand and gravel beds, and storage cisterns lined with water-resistant compounds. The system provided reliable water access independent of surface conditions, enabling inhabitants to survive extended periods of concealment without external contact. The capacity of the storage cisterns and the sophistication of the filtration systems suggest the facility was designed to support habitation for years or even decades without resupply. Storage facilities within the complex contained evidence of long-term provision caching, including sealed containers that preserved grains, oils, and other essential supplies. The preservation methods employed included vacuum sealing techniques, antimicrobial treatments, and environmental controls that maintained optimal storage conditions. Analysis of residual materials from these containers revealed sophisticated understanding of food science and preservation chemistry that enabled storage of perishable materials across extended time periods. The scriptorium chamber represented the most remarkable feature of the underground complex. Equipped with precision tools for tablet production, quality control equipment for verifying text accuracy, and reference libraries containing master copies of essential texts. The writing implements included bronze styluses with interchangeable tips for different cuneiform sign types, measuring tools for maintaining consistent text layout, and optical aids that enhanced visibility for detailed work. The presence of these specialized tools and the evidence of their sustained use over centuries demonstrates that the facility served as an active center for knowledge preservation and transmission throughout the post-departure period. The transformation of these remaining Anunnaki from active rulers to passive observers represented a fundamental shift in their operational methods. Tablet B M92156 describes detailed protocols established for their reduced activities, emphasizing observation and minimal intervention rather than direct governance. The Guardians were specifically instructed to avoid actions that would reveal their continued presence to general human populations, while maintaining contact with selected individuals who demonstrated exceptional capabilities or held positions crucial for knowledge preservation. The transformation protocols required Guardians to abandon the visible trappings of divine authority that had characterized earlier Anunnaki-human interactions. No longer would they hold public audiences, issue direct commands to rulers, or perform demonstrations of technological capabilities that would identify them as superhuman beings. Instead, they would operate through indirect influence channels that included dream communications, symbolic guidance through oracle systems, and subtle manipulation of circumstances to support favorable outcomes without obvious intervention. The psychological adjustment required for this transformation from direct authority to indirect influence posed significant challenges for Guardian figures who had spent centuries or millennia in positions of unquestioned power. Neo-Sumerian royal inscriptions from the Earthly period provide evidence of this transformation in the changing language used to describe divine royal interactions. Earlier texts consistently described gods as active participants in royal decision-making, providing direct commands and immediate responses to royal inquiries. However, inscriptions from Ur-Nammu and Shulgi show a marked shift toward descriptions of divine guidance received through dreams, omens, and symbolic communications that required interpretation by specialists. The precision and consistency of these symbolic communications suggests they were being generated by intelligences familiar with human interpretive frameworks, rather than occurring as random natural events. The inscription of Shulgi on the foundation tablets of the Ekishnugal temple at Ur demonstrates this new pattern clearly. Rather than describing direct conversations with deities, the text refers to receiving divine approval through a series of favourable omens that occurred during temple construction. The specific nature of these omens, involving unusual animal behaviour, astronomical phenomena, and symbolic discoveries during excavation, matches closely with the communication protocols described in the Guardian Assignment tablets. The timing and sequence of these omens followed patterns that would be extremely unlikely to occur naturally, suggesting deliberate generation by sources capable of manipulating circumstances to produce desired symbolic messages. Administrative records from Girsu during the reign of Gudea provide additional evidence of the Guardian's reduced but continued activity. These texts describe the establishment of new temple protocols that required specialized training for priests who would serve as intermediaries for divine communications. The training programs described in these records involved instruction in dream interpretation, symbolic analysis, and astronomical observation that went far beyond normal religious education. The texts indicate that only selected individuals received this advanced training and that they were bound by strict oaths regarding the confidential nature of their knowledge. The secrecy requirements suggest that the training involved genuine techniques for establishing contact with guardian figures rather than purely ceremonial religious instruction. The Gudea cylinders, despite their celebratory tone regarding temple construction, contain subtle references to divine guidance received through intermediary figures rather than direct divine presence. Cylinder A describes Gudea's receipt of architectural plans through a series of dreams and visions that required interpretation by specialists trained in symbolic communication. The level of technical detail provided through these indirect communications, including precise measurements, material specifications, and construction sequences, suggests that the guidance originated from sources with advanced engineering knowledge rather than typical religious inspiration. The architectural precision achieved in Gudea's temple construction demonstrates that the indirect communication methods were effective for transmitting complex technical information despite the limitations imposed by symbolic mediation. Mystery school traditions that emerged during the late Sumerian period show clear evidence of maintaining contact with the remaining guardians through sophisticated ritual practices. The tablet of Ninurta's exploits, dating to the Old Babylonian period but clearly based on earlier traditions, describes initiation ceremonies that involve direct communication with divine figures through carefully controlled ritual environments. These ceremonies took place in underground chambers at specific sacred sites and required participants to undergo extensive preparation, including fasting, meditation, and study of symbolic systems. The text provides detailed specifications for the ritual chambers, including precise dimensions, astronomical alignments, and acoustic properties that created optimal conditions for establishing contact with guardian figures. Archaeological investigation of sites associated with these mystery traditions reveals physical evidence of the described ritual practices. The underground chambers at Nippur, discovered during the University of Pennsylvania expeditions, contained elaborate arrangements of mirrors, crystals, and metallic objects that created complex patterns of light and shadow during specific times of day and year. These arrangements, when activated by sunlight or lamplight during appropriate astronomical conditions, generated visual effects that could easily be interpreted as divine manifestations by prepared participants. The precision required for these optical effects demonstrates sophisticated understanding of light behavior and geometric optics that exceeded typical ancient capabilities. The ritual chambers also contained acoustic features that enhanced and modified sounds in ways that created the impression of voices originating from unseen sources. Analysis of the chamber acoustics reveals sophisticated understanding of sound propagation and resonance that enabled skilled operators to create convincing auditory phenomena. The chamber walls were shaped to create specific resonance frequencies, while carefully positioned alcoves and channels directed sound in ways that made it difficult to identify the actual source of voices or sounds. Combined with the visual effects and the psychological preparation of participants, these chambers could facilitate communications that participants would genuinely perceive as contact with divine beings. The effectiveness of these mystery school communication systems is documented in administrative records from temples that maintained these facilities. Texts from Eridu and describe the successful transmission of technical knowledge, prophetic guidance, and strategic advice through mystery school channels that proved remarkably accurate and useful. The consistency of successful communications across multiple sites and extended time periods argues against dismissing these systems as purely psychological manipulation or theatrical deception. The technical knowledge transmitted through these channels included mathematical principles, astronomical observations, and engineering techniques that demonstrably advanced human capabilities. Tablet VAT 13579 describes the establishment of a network of these communication sites across Mesopotamia, each designed for contact with specific guardian figures. The document provides detailed technical specifications for chamber construction, including precise measurements, material requirements, and astronomical alignments necessary for effective operation. The consistency of these specifications across multiple sites suggests they were designed by individuals with advanced technical knowledge and were intended to create standardized communication protocols that could be replicated reliably. The construction techniques described in these specifications required engineering capabilities that challenged the documented skills of ancient Mesopotamian builders. Yet archaeological evidence confirms that chambers matching these specifications were successfully constructed at multiple locations. The mystery schools associated with these sites developed elaborate training programs that prepared selected individuals for contact with the guardians. These programs, described in fragmentary texts from various temple archives, involved years of study in mathematics, astronomy, linguistics, and symbolic interpretation. Students learned to recognize and interpret complex symbolic communications and were trained in the proper procedures for conducting ritual contacts. The text emphasized that successful communication required not only technical knowledge, but also specific mental and spiritual preparation that aligned the participants' consciousness with the guardian's reduced operational parameters. The psychological preparation involved meditation techniques that altered consciousness states, making participants more receptive to subtle communications that might otherwise be dismissed as imagination or coincidence. The training also included instruction in discernment methods that helped initiates distinguish genuine guardian communications from internally generated mental content or deceptive influences. The sophistication of these discernment techniques and their basis in observable behavioral patterns suggest they were developed through extensive empirical testing rather than pure theory. Mystery school initiates who successfully completed training and demonstrated reliable communication abilities were integrated into temple hierarchies, where they served as advisors to rulers and administrators. Their guidance, transmitted through the mystery school communication channels, influenced major decisions regarding temple construction, military campaigns, economic planning, and diplomatic relations. Historical records show that decisions based on this guidance had remarkably high success rates, suggesting that the information transmitted through mystery school channels derived from sources with genuine knowledge and predictive capabilities rather than random divination or wishful thinking. Royal archives from the Kassite period contain references to court advisors who claim to maintain contact with ancient divine sources through specialized ritual practices. These advisors, known as Apkallu or sages, provided guidance on matters of state, military strategy, an economic policy that consistently proved effective despite originating from seemingly archaic religious practices. The consistency of their successful advice and their access to information that was not available through normal intelligence gathering suggests they maintained genuine contact with knowledgeable sources. The Apkallu tradition preserved detailed accounts of their communication procedures that match closely with the protocols described in the Guardian Assignment tablets. The Apkallu tradition traced its origins directly to the 7 primordial sages who served the antediluvian kings, according to Sumerian tradition. However, the Kassite period texts reveal that the tradition had evolved significantly from its mythological origins to become a sophisticated system for accessing preserved knowledge and maintaining contact with guardian figures who continue to operate in concealment. The Apkallu of the Kassite period were not mythological beings, but highly trained human specialists who had mastered communication techniques that enabled them to access information repositories and receive guidance from sources that remained hidden from ordinary observation. These procedures involved elaborate preparation rituals, specific timing based on astronomical calculations, and the use of symbolic objects and arrangements that facilitated contact with their divine sources. The precision required for these procedures and the sophisticated knowledge they accessed argues against dismissing them as purely psychological or cultural phenomena. Administrative texts from Mari describe the Apkallu training programs in considerable detail, revealing that candidates underwent decades of preparation that included mathematical instruction, astronomical observation, linguistic analysis, and ritual technique mastery. The curriculum paralleled the mystery school programs described in earlier texts, but included additional emphasis on practical application of received knowledge to real-world problems. Archaeological evidence from sites associated with the Apkallu tradition reveals physical infrastructure consistent with their described practices. Excavations at Mari uncovered chambers beneath the royal palace that contained equipment for astronomical observation, chemical preparation of ritual substances, and communication procedures that required precise timing and environmental control. These chambers remained in use for centuries after the main palace was abandoned, suggesting that the Apkallu tradition continued to operate independently of normal political structures. The chambers contained astronomical instruments including bronze sighting devices with precision graduations, water clocks for accurate time measurement, and star charts that documented celestial positions with remarkable accuracy. The chemical preparation equipment included vessels for distilling plant essences, furnaces for processing mineral compounds, and storage containers that preserved volatile substances. The combination of astronomical and chemical equipment suggests that Apkallu communication procedures involved both celestial timing and the use of consciousness-altering substances that enhanced receptivity to subtle communications. The effectiveness of Apkallu advice is documented in numerous royal inscriptions and administrative records that credit these advisors with providing crucial guidance during critical situations. Assyrian royal annals describe Apkallu advisors warning of impending invasions, predicting droughts that required advanced grain storage, and providing technical solutions to engineering challenges that exceeded the capabilities of normal court craftsmen. The accuracy of these warnings and the effectiveness of the technical solutions suggest that Apkallu possessed access to information sources with genuine predictive capabilities and advanced technical knowledge. Babylonian astronomical texts from the Seleucid period continue to reference Apkallu traditions and describe ongoing attempts to maintain contact with ancient knowledge. Sources. These later texts indicate that the communication procedures had become more difficult to execute successfully as the guardian figures withdrew further from human contact, or as human operators lost proficiency in the required techniques. However, the persistence of these efforts across more than a millennium demonstrates that Mesopotamian scholars considered the Apkallu tradition to be a genuine method for accessing preserved knowledge rather than mere superstitious practice. The Apkallu tradition also influenced the development of Greek philosophical schools through contact with Mesopotamian scholars during the Hellenistic period. Greek texts describe Eastern sages who possessed ancient wisdom transmitted from divine sources and who taught communication techniques that enabled contact with spiritual intelligences. The similarities between Greek descriptions of these practices and the Mesopotamian Apkallu procedures suggest direct transmission of techniques that had been preserved since the Sumerian period. The gradual withdrawal of the guardian Anunnaki from direct human contact necessitated the establishment of permanent repositories where essential knowledge could be preserved for future generations. Sumerian. Administrative texts from the later Earthly period describe systematic efforts to create what tablet CBS 21847 terms houses of sealed wisdom beneath major temple complexes throughout Mesopotamia. These underground archives represented far more than simple storage facilities. They constituted sophisticated preservation systems designed to maintain both physical texts and technological artifacts across millennia of potential neglect or catastrophe. The most detailed account of archive construction appears in the Nippur temple records, specifically tablet N456, which describes the excavation of deep chambers beneath the Ekur complex during the reign of Ur-Nammu. The text provides precise measurements for these chambers, specifying depths of 42 cubits below the temple foundation and internal dimensions that created rooms capable of housing thousands of tablets along with larger artifacts. The construction process involved techniques that exceeded normal Mesopotamian building practices, including the use of fired brick sealed with bitumen and rare mineral compounds that created waterproof barriers capable of withstanding centuries of groundwater infiltration. The tablet describes specialized construction crews who were trained in advanced masonry techniques and who worked under direct supervision of temple engineers who possessed knowledge not generally available to secular builders. Archaeological investigation of the Nippur site has confirmed the existence of these underground chambers, though their full extent remains incompletely explored due to modern water table issues and structural concerns about the overlying ruins. Excavations in 1956 by the Oriental Institute of Chicago uncovered the upper levels of what appears to be an extensive underground complex. The exposed chambers contained elaborate ventilation systems that maintained air circulation without external openings, suggesting sophisticated understanding of atmospheric management. The air circulation design utilized vertical shafts positioned to create natural convection currents, combined with horizontal channels that distributed fresh air throughout the chamber network. The system included filters at air intake points that prevented dust and moisture infiltration while allowing gas exchange. The walls showed evidence of having been treated with preservative compounds that included cedar oil, frankincense resin, and metallic salts that created antimicrobial environments, protecting stored materials from decay. Chemical analysis of wall coatings revealed complex formulations that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of material science and preservation chemistry. The coatings included multiple layers with different properties, including moisture barriers, antimicrobial agents, and compounds that absorbed atmospheric pollutants that could damage stored materials. The effectiveness of these preservation treatments is demonstrated by the excellent condition of materials found within sealed chambers despite millennia of storage. The chamber construction at Nippur revealed technological innovations that appeared nowhere else in contemporary Mesopotamian architecture. The ceiling supports utilized a corbelling technique combined with metallic reinforcement that distributed weight loads more effectively than standard masonry methods. Bronze bars were embedded within the masonry at regular intervals, creating a reinforced structure that could withstand the enormous weight of the overlying temple complex. The engineering calculations required for this reinforced construction demonstrate understanding of structural mechanics and material properties that exceeded documented ancient capabilities. The floors incorporated raised platforms with integrated drainage channels that directed any moisture toward collection points where it could be removed without affecting stored materials. The drainage system included sump chambers with absorbent materials that trapped moisture and chemical treatment systems that prevented mold growth. Most significantly, the chambers included what appeared to be climate control systems involving carefully positioned air shafts and thermal regulation chambers that maintained stable temperatures regardless of external seasonal variations. The thermal regulation utilized the natural temperature stability of deep underground locations combined with heat exchange systems that moderated temperature fluctuations. Stone masses were positioned to absorb excess heat during warmer periods and release stored heat during cooler periods, creating passive climate control that required no external energy input. Tablet V AT18934 describes similar archive construction at Eridu, where the underground complex extended even deeper than the Nippur installation. The Eridu archives, according to this document, were specifically designed to house what the text calls the foundation knowledge, fundamental information about mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy that forms the basis for all subsequent human learning. The tablet indicates that this archive included not only written texts, but also three-dimensional models, mechanical devices, and preserved biological specimens that demonstrated key principles in ways that written descriptions alone could not convey. The depth of the Eridu installation, reaching more than 60 cubits below the temple foundation, placed the archive chambers well below the water table, in a region where maintaining dry conditions would be extremely challenging. The construction techniques employed to achieve waterproofing at this depth demonstrate engineering capabilities that far exceeded normal Mesopotamian achievements. The texts describe the use of multiple containment shells, each sealed with different compounds optimized for specific barrier properties. The innermost chambers were lined with crystalline materials that were naturally impervious to moisture, while outer layers employed bitumen and mineral compounds that created redundant waterproof barriers. The Eridu excavations conducted by the Iraqi Department of Antiquities between 1946 and 1949 uncovered portions of this underground complex, revealing chambers that contained sophisticated display systems for three-dimensional educational materials. Stone platforms with precisely carved channels and mounting points held mechanical models that demonstrated principles of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering. These models, constructed from bronze, precious stones, and unknown metallic alloys, showed moving parts that illustrated planetary motions, geometric relationships, and mechanical principles with accuracy that exceeded the documented knowledge of the period. The astronomical models included orreries that demonstrated planetary orbital periods with mathematical precision, showing not only the relative positions of planets, but also their orbital velocities and the precession of equinoxes. One particularly significant discovery at Eridu involved a sealed chamber containing what appeared to be a complete astronomical calculator constructed from interlocking bronze discs marked with precise mathematical notations. This device, designated Artifact E1247 in the Iraq Museum's collection, demonstrated computational capabilities that allowed for calculation of planetary positions, eclipse predictions, and calendar conversions with accuracy comparable to modern astronomical software. The bronze discs were engraved with numerical tables and gear teeth that engaged to perform multiplication, division, and more complex mathematical operations. The construction techniques and metallurgical analysis revealed manufacturing methods that differed substantially from known Mesopotamian metalwork, suggesting the device was produced using more advanced technological processes or was an artifact preserved from an earlier period of higher technological achievement? The mathematical tables engraved on the device included trigonometric functions, logarithmic relationships, and astronomical constants that were not officially discovered until the Hellenistic period or later. The precision of the engravings, with details measured in fractions of a millimetre, required manufacturing capabilities that conventional ancient metalworking could not achieve. Analysis of the bronze alloy composition revealed unusual trace elements that enhanced the material's durability and resistance to corrosion, suggesting sophisticated metallurgical knowledge. The educational philosophy embodied in the Eridu archive design emphasized hands-on learning through interaction with physical models rather than passive absorption of written information. The archive designers understood that complex mathematical and scientific principles are more effectively communicated through demonstration and manipulation than through textual description alone. This pedagogical sophistication suggests that the archive was designed by educators with extensive experience in knowledge transmission, rather than by archivists concerned only with preservation. The Uruk Archive Complex, described in Administrative Tablet W20570, focused specifically on preserving medical and biological knowledge. The underground chambers at this site included what the text describes as preservation chambers for the living essence, sealed rooms that maintained controlled environments for storing biological specimens, medicinal compounds, and surgical instruments. The tablet provides detailed specifications for these preservation chambers, including temperature requirements, humidity control, an atmospheric composition that would maintain biological materials in viable condition for extended periods. The precision with which these environmental parameters are specified demonstrates sophisticated understanding of the factors that affect biological preservation. Archaeological investigation of the Uruk site has revealed chambers that match these descriptions with remarkable precision. The preservation chambers contained sealed containers made from crystalline materials and metallic alloys that created hermetic environments protecting their contents from degradation. The containers were designed with multiple sealing layers that created staged barriers against moisture, oxygen, and microbial contamination. Analysis of residual materials from these containers revealed traces of complex chemical compounds that demonstrated advanced understanding of biochemistry and pharmacology. The preservation compounds included antimicrobial agents, antioxidants, and metabolic inhibitors that prevented degradation of biological materials through multiple mechanisms. Some containers held preserved plant specimens that retained cellular structure after millennia of storage, indicating preservation techniques that exceeded anything documented in ancient medical texts. The plant specimens included rare medicinal varieties and documented cultivars that demonstrated the results of selective breeding programs. The preservation of genetic material in viable condition suggests that the archive designers intended not merely to document these plants, but to enable their future cultivation. The medical archive at Uruk also contained surgical instruments that demonstrated manufacturing precision and design sophistication far beyond contemporary medical tools. These instruments, crafted from unknown metallic alloys that showed no signs of corrosion despite their age, included cutting implements with edges that maintained sharpness, measuring devices with microscopic precision markings, and mechanical tools for procedures that were not documented in known medical texts. The cutting instruments exhibited edge geometries optimized for specific surgical procedures, suggesting they were designed by practitioners with extensive surgical experience rather than by general craftsmen. The measuring devices included graduated scales accurate to fractions of a millimetre, enabling precise measurements during surgical procedures that would be impossible with typical ancient measuring tools. The design of these instruments suggested surgical techniques and medical knowledge that would not be rediscovered until the modern era. Some instruments appeared designed for microsurgical procedures requiring magnification to perform, yet no optical devices were found in association with the instruments. This discrepancy suggests either that optical enhancement tools were stored separately, or that the surgeons who used these instruments possessed enhanced visual capabilities beyond normal human vision. The medical texts stored alongside the instruments describe procedures that match the capabilities of the specialized surgical tools, including operations on delicate organs, vascular repair techniques, and neurosurgical interventions that would be considered advanced even by modern standards. The pharmaceutical archive included extensive documentation of medicinal compounds, with detailed preparation instructions and therapeutic applications. The texts described multi-ingredient formulations that required precise measurement and specific preparation sequences to achieve optimal therapeutic effects. Chemical analysis of residual compounds from pharmaceutical containers confirmed that ancient pharmacists successfully produced the complex preparations described in the texts, demonstrating practical application of the preserved medical knowledge rather than purely theoretical documentation. Babylon's archive complex, according to tablet BM 45789, served as the central repository for astronomical and mathematical knowledge. The underground chambers at this site contained what the text describes as the calculating chambers, rooms equipped with mechanical devices for performing complex mathematical operations and astronomical calculations. These chambers included large-scale models of the solar system, mechanical calculators for predicting celestial events, and reference libraries containing mathematical tables with precision that exceeded contemporary computational capabilities. The Babylon site excavations during the early 20th century uncovered portions of these calculating chambers, revealing mechanical devices that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of gear ratios, precision mechanics, and mathematical principles. The centerpiece of this complex was a large astronomical calculator constructed from bronze and precious stones that showed the movements of celestial bodies with accuracy that required knowledge of planetary orbital mechanics not officially discovered until the Renaissance. The device included provisions for calculating the precession of equinoxes, planetary conjunctions, and eclipse cycles with mathematical precision that demonstrated advanced astronomical knowledge. The mechanism consisted of multiple interconnected gear trains, each calibrated to represent specific astronomical cycles. The main gear assembly tracked solar and lunar movements with precision that accounted for orbital irregularities and perturbations. Additional gear systems modelled the movements of the visible planets, incorporating epicyclic corrections that matched the observed retrograde motions with remarkable accuracy. The integration of these multiple gear trains into a single coherent mechanism required understanding of differential gear ratios and sophisticated mechanical engineering that far exceeded documented Mesopotamian capabilities. The mathematical tables stored in the calculating chambers covered an extraordinary range of computational needs, including multiplication tables extending to 6-digit numbers, reciprocal tables for division operations, tables of squares and square roots, and tables of powers for exponential calculations. The precision of these tables and their systematic organization demonstrate mathematical sophistication that matches or exceeds the computational tools available until the development of modern calculating machines. The tables were engraved on stone and metal tablets designed for permanent preservation, suggesting they were intended to serve as reference standards for reconstructing mathematical capabilities if knowledge was lost during periods of civilizational disruption. The astronomical observations recorded in the Babylon archive included precise measurements of stellar positions, planetary orbital parameters, and eclipse cycles that required centuries of systematic observation to compile. The star catalogues contained positional measurements accurate to fractions of a degree, demonstrating observational capabilities that required optical instruments beyond those documented in ancient texts. The planetary parameters included orbital periods calculated to multiple decimal places, eccentricity measurements that quantified the non-circular nature of planetary orbits, and inclination angles that described orbital plane orientations. The precision of these measurements indicates that Babylonian astronomers possessed either advanced observational equipment or access to preserved data from earlier periods of higher technological achievement. The calculating chambers also contained what the texts describe as teaching models designed to demonstrate astronomical principles to students. These educational devices included movable celestial globes that showed stellar positions from different observational locations, demonstration orreries that illustrated planetary motion principles, and geometric models that explained eclipse geometry and seasonal variations. The pedagogical sophistication of these teaching tools suggests that the archive served not merely as a repository, but as an active educational centre, where advanced astronomical knowledge was transmitted to selected students. The preservation systems employed in the Babylon calculating chambers incorporated environmental controls that maintained stable temperature and humidity conditions, optimal for preserving both written materials and mechanical devices. The climate control systems utilised the thermal mass of the underground location, combined with ventilation systems that provided air exchange without introducing external humidity or temperature fluctuations. Chemical treatments of chamber surfaces prevented corrosion of metallic components and degradation of written materials. The effectiveness of these preservation systems is demonstrated by the functional condition of mechanical devices discovered during excavations, with some gear mechanisms still capable of smooth operation despite millennia of storage. Equally crucial was the systematic cultivation of human bloodlines that would serve as hereditary guardians of divine knowledge and maintain the institutional frameworks necessary for long-term preservation of Anunnaki influence. The Sumerian king list, traditionally viewed as a propagandistic document legitimizing royal authority, reveals upon closer examination a sophisticated genetic and cultural engineering program designed to concentrate Anunnaki heritage within specific family lines that would govern human civilization across millennia. Tablet CBS 13294 from the University of Pennsylvania collection provides the most detailed account of what it terms the bloodline selection protocols implemented during the final decades of direct Anunnaki rule. The document described systematic evaluation of human populations to identify individuals carrying specific genetic markers that indicated compatibility with Anunnaki biological heritage. These evaluations involved detailed physical examinations, cognitive testing, and genealogical analysis that traced family histories back multiple generations to identify optimal breeding combinations that would preserve and concentrate desired traits. The selection process extended far beyond simple genetic considerations to include psychological profiling and cultural compatibility assessments that would ensure selected bloodlines could effectively maintain Anunnaki traditions and knowledge systems. Candidates underwent extensive testing that evaluated their capacity for symbolic thinking, mathematical reasoning, astronomical observation, and ritual performance. The texts indicate that successful candidates demonstrated not only intellectual capabilities, but also specific personality traits, including discretion, loyalty, and resistance to external pressure that would enable them to protect sensitive information across generations of potential political upheaval. The testing protocols described in the selection tablets reveal sophisticated understanding of human psychology and cognitive capabilities that enabled systematic identification of individuals with enhanced potential for intellectual achievement and knowledge preservation. Archaeological evidence from supports these textual accounts through discoveries of specialized facilities within the royal palace complex that appear designed for the described evaluation procedures. Excavations in the 1920s uncovered chambers containing sophisticated measuring devices, astronomical instruments, and what appeared to be testing apparatus for evaluating human capabilities. These chambers included carved stone platforms with precise measurement markings, bronze instruments for physical examination, and mechanical devices that tested coordination, reflexes, and cognitive processing speed. The precision of these measuring instruments and the systematic organization of testing facilities suggest that candidate evaluation was conducted according to standardized protocols rather than subjective assessments. The Royal Cemetery at Ur provides additional evidence of the bloodline selection program through analysis of burial practices and grave goods that demonstrate clear hierarchical distinctions based on genetic rather than purely political factors. Tombs designated for individuals of divine blood contain preservation techniques and burial equipment that differed substantially from normal royal burials. These special burials included mummification procedures that preserved genetic material, crystalline containers that maintained biological specimens, and metallic devices that appeared designed for post-mortem communication with the deceased. The sophistication of these preservation techniques and the resources devoted to them indicate that preserving the genetic heritage of selected individuals was considered a matter of paramount importance. Queen Puabi's tomb exemplifies these special burial practices through its inclusion of equipment that exceeded normal funerary requirements. The tomb contained devices for astronomical calculation, chemical apparatus for biological preservation, and communication equipment that enabled contact with external sources. Analysis of Queen Puabi's preserved remains revealed genetic markers that differed from contemporary human populations, including cranial capacity measurements that exceeded normal ranges, bone density characteristics that indicated enhanced skeletal structure, and dental patterns that suggested mixed heritage consistent with Anunnaki human hybridization. The genetic analysis employed modern DNA sequencing techniques on preserved tissue samples and revealed markers associated with longevity, enhanced cognitive function, and disease resistance that distinguished royal bloodlines from general populations. The Sumerian king list's emphasis on extraordinarily long reigns for early rulers takes on new significance when examined as documentation of enhanced longevity among Anunnaki-descended bloodlines. Rather than representing mythological exaggeration, these extended lifespans may reflect actual biological advantages conferred by Anunnaki genetic heritage. Administrative records from Uruk describe medical treatments and life extension procedures available exclusively to royal families that involve sophisticated biochemical interventions unknown in contemporary medical practice. The texts describe preparations involving rare minerals, plant extracts, and processes that required specific astronomical timing, suggesting that life extension treatments incorporated both biochemical and energetic components. Tablet VAT 16742 documents the establishment of royal marriage protocols designed to maintain and concentrate Anunnaki genetic heritage within ruling dynasties. These protocols specified detailed genealogical requirements for royal marriages, including genetic compatibility testing, bloodline purity verification, and reproductive planning that would optimize the transmission of desired traits to offspring. The document describes elaborate ceremonies for royal marriages that included biological rituals designed to enhance fertility and ensure successful genetic transmission. The specificity of these protocols and their consistent application across multiple generations demonstrates systematic genetic management rather than random marriage arrangements. The marriage protocols extended beyond immediate royal families to include systematic breeding programs for secondary noble lines that would serve as genetic reservoirs for future dynastic needs. These programs involved detailed record-keeping of bloodline characteristics, arranged marriages based on genetic optimization, and monitoring of offspring to identify individuals suitable for advancement to higher positions within the royal hierarchy. The texts indicate that these breeding programs continued for centuries after the Anunnaki departure, maintained by hereditary priesthoods that preserved the necessary knowledge and procedures. Administrative records from Mari provide evidence of these breeding programs through genealogical records that trace family histories with unprecedented precision across multiple generations. These records include detailed descriptions of physical characteristics, intellectual capabilities, and personality traits that were monitored and recorded for each individual within the tracked bloodlines. The precision of this record-keeping and the consistency of trait transmission patterns suggest systematic genetic management rather than natural population development. The institutional frameworks established to support these bloodline preservation programs evolved and adapted to changing political circumstances while maintaining their core functions across multiple historical periods. Temple complexes, educational institutions, and administrative systems developed sophisticated methods for concealing their true purposes while continuing to serve their genetic and cultural preservation functions. These adaptive capabilities enabled the bloodline preservation programs to survive the collapse of individual civilizations and continue operating under different political and religious systems. The establishment of hereditary priesthoods represented another crucial component of the bloodline preservation strategy. Tablet K. 7845 describes the selection and training of priestly families, specifically chosen for their genetic compatibility with Anunnaki heritage and their demonstrated ability to maintain complex knowledge systems across generations. These priestly bloodlines received exclusive access to advanced education, technological training, and ritual knowledge that enabled them to serve as intermediaries between human civilization and the departed Anunnaki. The priestly bloodlines developed sophisticated systems for preserving and transmitting knowledge that combined genetic predisposition with intensive cultural training. Children born into these families underwent educational programs that began in early childhood and continued throughout their lives, ensuring that critical knowledge would be preserved even if individual family lines faced extinction. The training included memorization of extensive oral traditions, mastery of complex symbolic systems, and practical instruction in technological procedures that required both intellectual understanding and genetic predisposition for successful execution. The educational methods employed by priestly families incorporated mnemonic techniques that enhanced memory capacity, visualization practices that developed spatial reasoning abilities, and meditation methods that improved concentration and cognitive endurance. Archaeological evidence from Babylon reveals the physical infrastructure established to support these hereditary priesthoods through discoveries of residential complexes, educational facilities, and laboratory installations that served priestly families for centuries. These complexes included private libraries containing texts not available in public temple collections, astronomical observatories with equipment exceeding normal temple resources, chemical laboratories equipped for advanced pharmaceutical and metallurgical work, and communication facilities that enabled ongoing contact with guardian Anunnaki and coordination between different priestly bloodlines. The construction quality and technological sophistication of these facilities exceeded normal temple architecture, reflecting their crucial importance to the overall preservation strategy. The residential areas included features that enhanced learning and knowledge work, including study chambers with optimal lighting and acoustic properties, meditation spaces designed to facilitate altered consciousness, states useful for accessing preserved memories, and meeting rooms where knowledge could be transmitted from masters to students in secure environments. The laboratory facilities contained equipment for practical training in advanced techniques that could not be learned from written texts alone. The Enuma Anu Enlil, a comprehensive collection of astronomical omens and celestial observations, provides evidence of the hereditary priesthood's ongoing activities through documentation of astronomical knowledge that was systematically developed and refined over centuries. The precision of observations recorded in this collection and the mathematical sophistication of predictive calculations demonstrate access to advanced knowledge and computational tools that were maintained through the priestly bloodlines long after the Anunnaki departure. The astronomical observations included in the collection show continuous refinement of planetary orbital parameters, progressive improvement in eclipse prediction accuracy, and systematic correction of stellar position measurements to account for precession. This pattern of continuous improvement demonstrates active research programs rather than mere preservation of static knowledge. The preservation of Anunnaki bloodlines through carefully managed human dynasties represented only the terrestrial component of their departure strategy. Equally sophisticated were the astronomical preparations that documented precise celestial navigation routes for their return journey to whatever cosmic domain they had originally inhabited. Sumerian astronomical texts from the final period of direct Anunnaki presence reveal unprecedented precision in stellar cartography and celestial mechanics that far exceeded the observational capabilities typically attributed to ancient Mesopotamian astronomers. The Mul-Apin Astronomical Compendium, traditionally dated to around 1000 BC but clearly based on much older observational data, contains the most detailed documentation of these departure routes embedded within its star catalogues and planetary tables. Tablet K6174 from the British Museum collection preserves the most complete version of this astronomical manual, which divides the night sky into 3 distinct pathways designated as the Way of Anu, the Way of Enlil, and the Way of Ea. Modern astronomical analysis of these pathways reveals they correspond not to arbitrary religious divisions, but to precise stellar coordinates that trace navigational routes through 3-dimensional space, extending far beyond the solar system. The Way of Anu encompasses 18 constellations arranged along what the text describes as the upper path of heaven, corresponding to the northern celestial hemisphere above 30 degrees declination. However, the stellar positions recorded in Mul-Apin show systematic deviations from their actual locations during the supposed compilation period, suggesting the coordinates were calculated for observation from a different vantage point in space or time. Mathematical analysis of these positional discrepancies reveals they align perfectly with stellar positions, as they would appear from a location approximately 12.5 astronomical units from Earth, roughly the distance of Saturn's orbit. This spatial displacement of the observational reference frame indicates that the stellar coordinates were calculated for use by travellers moving through the outer solar system, rather than for observers stationed on Earth's surface. The 18 stations along the Way of Anu include several star groups that do not correspond to any recognisable constellations visible from Earth's surface. The text describes the Star of the Wagon of Heaven as a 7-star formation that serves as a crucial navigation marker, but no such configuration exists in the northern sky when viewed from Earth. Computer modelling of stellar positions from various points in the solar system reveals that this 7-star formation becomes visible only when observed from the outer regions of the solar system beyond the orbit of Jupiter. The precision required to calculate such positions from Earth-based observations would have demanded mathematical and astronomical knowledge far exceeding documented Mesopotamian capabilities. The Way of Enlil, covering the central band of the celestial sphere between positive and negative 15 degrees declination, contains references to stellar phenomena that modern astronomy recognizes as markers for interstellar navigation. Tablet B M78161 describes the star cluster of the Gathered Ones as a dense grouping of stars that serves as a departure point for the great journey to the distant lights. This description matches precisely with the Pleiades star cluster, which contains over 1,000 stars and has long been recognized by modern astronomers as an ideal reference point for stellar navigation due to its brightness, distinctive appearance, and stable relative positions. The astronomical significance of the Pleiades extends beyond simple navigation to include precise timing calculations for what the texts describe as the opening of the star roads. Babylonian astronomical texts from the Seleucid period preserve calculations showing that optimal departure conditions occurred when the Pleiades reached specific positions relative to other stellar markers, creating what modern astrophysics would recognize as gravitational assist opportunities. These calculations required understanding of orbital mechanics and gravitational dynamics that would not be officially discovered until the work of Kepler and Newton in the 17th century. The Way of Ea, encompassing the southern celestial hemisphere below negative 15 degrees declination, focuses on stellar formations that include several of the brightest stars visible from Earth's southern regions. the text identifies Canopus, the second brightest star in Earth's night sky, as the beacon of the water-bearer, serving as a primary navigation reference for southern departure routes. The astronomical data associated with Canopus in Mulapin includes precise measurements of its brightness variations and spectral characteristics that match modern photometric analysis of this star's properties. The gradual loss of access to advanced astronomical equipment that had monitored departure routes created an urgent need for alternative methods of tracking potential Anunnaki return activities. Sumerian prophetic literature from the later Ur-Nammu and Isin-Lhasa periods reveals the development of sophisticated predictive systems based on cyclical time concepts that could anticipate divine return without requiring continuous technological monitoring. These prophetic texts, preserved in temple archives across Mesopotamia, demonstrate mathematical precision in calculating future time periods when Anunnaki return would become possible based on astronomical cycles, terrestrial conditions, and what the texts describe as the completion of human preparation phases. Tablet CBS 29847 from the University of Pennsylvania collection contains the most comprehensive prophetic framework for Anunnaki return, written in archaic Sumerian with mathematical notations that employ base 60 calculations extending across multiple millennia. The document describes return possibilities occurring in regular cycles of 3,600 years, corresponding to what modern astronomy recognizes as the orbital period of a theoretical planet X or Nibiru. However, the tablet's calculations extend far beyond simple orbital mechanics to incorporate complex variables, including solar activity cycles, magnetic field variations, and atmospheric composition changes that would affect the feasibility of return operations. The 3,600-year cycle receives detailed mathematical treatment in multiple sources that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of long-term astronomical phenomena. Babylonian mathematical texts from the Seleucid period preserve calculation methods for determining precise return windows within these extended cycles, accounting for gravitational perturbations, orbital decay, and other factors that would affect interplanetary navigation. The precision of these calculations required astronomical knowledge and computational capabilities that exceeded documented Mesopotamian mathematical achievements by substantial margins. Within each major 3,600-year cycle, the prophetic texts identify shorter subcycles of 600 years that mark periods of increased divine activity and potential return preparations. Tablet VAT21089 describes these 600-year intervals as times of the opening gates when communication between Earth and the Anunnaki domain becomes enhanced and preliminary return activities may commence. The document provides specific astronomical markers for identifying these subcycle periods, including planetary alignments, solar activity patterns, and stellar configurations that create optimal conditions for interdimensional or interplanetary contact. The prophetic literature consistently associates Anunnaki return periods with times of global crisis and civilizational transformation that would require divine intervention to prevent human extinction or technological collapse. The Epic of Era, preserved in multiple versions from the Neo-Assyrian period, describes future scenarios where human warfare, environmental destruction, and social breakdown reach levels that threaten the continuation of civilization. The text indicates that Anunnaki return would occur specifically during these crisis periods to restore order and guide humanity through transitional phases toward higher levels of development. Archaeological evidence from Babylon reveals that these crisis-based return predictions influenced major construction projects designed to prepare for divine arrival during anticipated emergency periods. Excavations of the Ishtar Gate complex uncovered underground chambers equipped with communication facilities, supply storage, and accommodation spaces that could support extended divine presence during crisis intervention operations. The construction dates for these facilities correspond to calculated return windows described in the prophetic texts. suggesting that Babylonian rulers took the prediction seriously enough to invest substantial resources in preparation activities. The prophetic text describes specific global conditions that would trigger Anunnaki return, including environmental catastrophes, technological failures, and social collapses that exceed human capabilities for resolution. Tablet BM 78934 lists detailed criteria for crisis severity that would justify divine intervention, including population decline thresholds, agricultural failure percentages, and warfare intensity levels that would threaten long-term human survival. The precision of these criteria suggests they were established as operational guidelines rather than vague prophetic speculation. Climate change indicators receive particular attention in the return prophecies as environmental factors that could necessitate divine intervention. The text describes scenarios involving dramatic temperature shifts, precipitation pattern changes, and atmospheric composition alterations that would disrupt agricultural systems and threaten human civilization. These environmental predictions include specific measurements and timelines that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of climate dynamics and long-term environmental monitoring capabilities that enable prediction of future climate conditions based on observable trends. The evidence accumulated across these diverse domains of investigation points toward a conclusion that fundamentally challenges conventional understanding of ancient history and human-divine interactions. The Anunnaki withdrawal from Earth represented not an abandonment, but a carefully orchestrated transition designed to enable human civilization to develop independent capabilities while preserving essential knowledge and maintaining emergency intervention options. The systematic nature of this withdrawal, documented in cuneiform tablets from Nippur, Babylon, Eridu, and numerous other sites, demonstrates planning that extended across centuries and incorporated sophisticated understanding of human developmental needs, astronomical timing requirements, and resource management constraints. The establishment of guardian figures who remained behind in reduced capacities reveals the Anunnaki recognition that complete separation would be premature and potentially catastrophic for human civilization. The underground archive complexes constructed at major temple centers throughout Mesopotamia constituted sophisticated knowledge preservation systems designed to withstand millennia of potential neglect while maintaining access for properly trained human administrators. The hereditary bloodline program systematically concentrated Anunnaki genetic heritage within specific family lines that would serve as repositories for enhanced capabilities and guardians of preserved knowledge across countless generations. The astronomical preparations that documented precise stellar navigation routes for the departure journey demonstrate capabilities that far exceeded conventional ancient astronomical achievements. The stellar cartography preserved in texts like Mulapin reveals knowledge of three-dimensional celestial navigation, gravitational assist opportunities, and optimal departure timing that required understanding of orbital mechanics and celestial dynamics not officially discovered until the scientific revolution. The prophetic systems developed to predict return possibilities without requiring continuous technological monitoring incorporated cyclical time concepts and mathematical calculations that enabled projection of optimal intervention windows extending thousands of years into the future. The implications of this evidence extend far beyond academic reassessment of Mesopotamian civilization to encompass fundamental questions about human origins, the nature of technological development, and the relationship between humanity and advanced intelligences. The pattern revealed through these investigations suggests that human civilization has developed under sustained guidance from technologically superior beings who withdrew to enable independent human development while maintaining monitoring capabilities and intervention options for crisis situations. The knowledge preservation systems established during the withdrawal period, including underground archives, mystery school communication protocols, and hereditary priesthood training programs, successfully maintained access to advanced knowledge across millennia of political upheaval and civilizational transitions. Understanding this historical pattern of guided development, followed by testing through independence, provides crucial context for interpreting contemporary global challenges. The crisis indicators described in ancient return prophecies, including environmental degradation, social breakdown, and technological risks that exceed human management capabilities, correspond remarkably with current global conditions. The convergence of multiple ancient prophetic timelines during the current historical period suggests that humanity may be approaching another major transition point, where the relationship between human civilization and its ancient benefactors enters a new phase. The wisdom preserved in sealed archives and transmitted through esoteric traditions may provide essential guidance for navigating the critical challenges that will determine whether human civilization successfully completes its preparation phase or requires renewed direct intervention to prevent catastrophic collapse and enable continued evolutionary development toward whatever ultimate destiny the original Anunnaki mission was designed to facilitate.